In May of 1996, 8 climbers died whilst descending from the summit of Mount Everest. The entire season oversaw the death of 12 people. It would be the deadliest season for summiting the mountain, only surpassed in 2014 and 2015. In 1997, John Krakauer, an American journalist who had been summiting with the group that had lost their lives during the descent, released Into Thin Air, a really fantastic book detailing a first-hand account of the disaster. In 2015, Universal released the film Everest, a narrative drama detailing the expedition and those involved with it, including a fictional John Krakauer. In the film, the fictional John Krakauer is awoken by Anatoly Bukreev, one of the group's guides, and informed him that a portion of their camp was stuck in the storm that had consumed the mountain. When asked if he was able to help form a rescue team, the fictional Krakauer says this:
I can't see, Totally. I'm snowblind. It's gonna take all we got just to get ourselves down. I don't wanna die, man.
Now, there's a bit of an issue here, mostly stemming from the fact that John Krakauer never said this. By his own account, Krakauer, who had reached the camp hours ahead of the other climbers, collapsed in his tent due to exhaustion and lack of oxygen, only briefly aware of the situation as he phased in and out of consciousness. When the film was released, Krakauer was understandably pissed off about the creative license that the film had taken here, labeling the entire thing as bullshit. Into Thin Air describes how Krakauer and others who returned home safely experienced a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt, stating that he wished he had never stepped foot on Everest and still struggled with it years after the event. The filmmakers defended their actions, saying something about not wanting to place blame on anyone, etc, but this is a pretty poor excuse. They chose to create a film based on a real and traumatic event involving people who are still alive today, and completely neglected their duty of care when considering the real lives of those involved. They created a fictitious exchange where Krakauer chose not to help. The filmmakers chose to misrepresent a real person with real trauma in favour of a more dramatic and conflict-filled scene for their movie, and those who are unfamiliar with the event will assume this film is based on pretty accurate information. This is how many people will view Krakauer's role in the disaster, and that is a pretty awful thing to do to someone who is already struggling with a very real case of survivor's guilt. So, why does this matter, I hear you ask? Deliver on the clickbait, I hear you shout. Well, with this in mind, let's talk true crime. I'm not a fan of true crime, I'm not a fan of the documentaries, I'm not a fan of the podcasts, or the YouTubers, or the TV shows and movies. However, I feel like there are some exceptions here, exceptions that separate themselves from falling into this weird genre of true crime that can be pretty tasteless at times. Mindhunter is, or was, RIP, a show on Netflix loosely based on true-ish events, following a handful of FBI agents developing the materials and theories used to profile serial killers, psychopaths, sociopaths, you know the ones, a real pick and mix of dysfunction. It features scenes with real infamous killers. The whole thing is set against the backdrop of the BTK killer, or as we should refer to him, the floppy disk failure. The second season even throws our characters into the real 1980s Atlanta child murderer investigations. It's really good, and it's an absolute travesty it looks like there won't ever be a third season. So how can I say that I enjoy something like Mindhunter, but in the same breath be very critical of something like Dahmer, which is a show that I actually find myself kind of repulsed by at times? Well, I think it's all about intent and creative license. Mindhunter is an extremely slow burn, character-led show focused on the behaviour and psychology of serial killers, and in season 2 even takes the time to criticise the very techniques developed by the characters within the show used to profile these killers. It also, very importantly, doesn't show the crimes or murders happening, and Mindhunter, without showing these crimes, does a much better job of exploring the psychology and character of these killers without indulging their real-life egos through its excellent direction and dialogue. specifically the scenes where they travel to various prisons and interview said killers. I don't want to take up more time in this video by going into detail on these scenes, but there are many videos out there detailing why they're so good. Even though it uses real killers and features scenes depicting the fallout felt by real victims, it avoids sensationalism by only showing us the aftermath of these murders, highlighting the devastation left behind in the cold light of day. We never lose sight of the main focus of the show.
We didn't want it to be serial killer of the week, but by the same token, part of what they're trying to codify, what they're trying to understand, what they're trying to pigeonhole, you know, in its most sort of demeaning, is who these people are and where they fit into their particular filing cabinet at the FBI. We wanted to show that. A lot of the stuff that Kemper says is on record. It's not as though that even required much research.
Like this scene with a survivor of the floppy disk failure, it feels very restrained and methodical. It comes across like a genuine testimony. The drama in this scene is created solely through the camera work, sound design, and performance. It never loses sight of the show's focus. The personality and legacy of the killers isn't really ever a factor, it's all about the victim. Dahmer, on the other hand, comes across almost like an exploitation film, a piece of media intended to attract an audience by its sensationalist and controversial content. Dahmer's main draw seems to be the shocking on-screen killings and crazy antics of the killer that we're following. It's very telling that the most viral and widespread sequence of that show is the sandwich scene. Like, wow, look at this, look how fucked up this is. To me, it feels like cheap thrills and easy drama that will draw a crowd without having to exercise much thought or skill. But alright, even if Dahmer is a little schlocky, why does this matter? Well, by showing the murders and depicting the victims in those scenes, the filmmakers are fabricating motive and adding speculation to the behaviour of those who were killed. It removes their voice, it takes their horrifying experience and turns it into fiction, into entertainment. But unlike the case with Into Thin Air, the victims aren't around to discredit these scenes. Following the release of Dahmer, a family member of Rita Isbell took to Twitter to say they were deeply unhappy about the scene. It's traumatizing over and over again, and for what? How many movies, shows, documentaries do we need? And I think they're right. It feels incredibly cynical and insidious to turn this loss and trauma into a bit of frothy entertainment for Netflix. I mean, in October, I saw Netflix had featured the show in their Halloween and spooky category. Like, what the fuck? What are you doing? And I know that's nothing to do with the creators of the show, but I feel like it illustrates the weird way we've started to view true crime in a pretty astute way. The creators of the show claim that they want to give a voice to the victims of Dahmer, explore the racism and disregard for minorities that allowed this man to get away with his crimes for so long. But I would argue by showing the killings and sensationalizing the murders, they're doing the exact opposite. Their story and their experience becomes a backdrop to the main event, Crazy Dahmer and his even crazier murders. I think it would be difficult to deny that's the main draw of the show. And this is actually something I explore in my video Mockumentary Done Wrong in a little more detail, which might seem a bit weird. I know the thumbnail has a picture of Michael Scott here, but yeah, give it a watch. You can explore the victim's story and the failure of the institutions that allowed Dahmer to roam free for so long without recreating or showing scenes like this. And it honestly makes the claim that they wanted to explore and give a voice to the victims feel like a get out of jail free card to do as you please. And I feel like this happens all too often with true crime related media. A relation to one of Ted Bundy's victims came out and publicly denounced Zac Efron vehicle extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile. Not only can it lead to potentially fictitious and insulting depiction of events, but I'm willing to bet that Ted Bundy would be pretty thrilled if he knew Zac Efron was depicting him in a film. And I know the rationale behind that film is his charm and looks disarmed and manipulated the media, but the headlines and pull of Zac Efron plays Ted Bundy only adds to the real killer's ever-growing celebrity and what they would consider as a legacy. And if I was related to a victim or knew a victim, I'd feel a certain way about that. I think this is why we find ourselves in a situation where Dahmer and other serial killers have stan accounts on Twitter. I understand this is thankfully a pretty small and bizarre online community, but I think it's indicative of how the media representing these figures have missed the mark when it comes to how they portray them on screen. Casting a popular and attractive young man as this awful killer is going to have this weird inverse effects on a lot of audience members, and I think the creators know that. Their aim, after all, is to attract the biggest audience possible and generate some dollar, which is what makes the claim that this series was born through a desire to provide a voice to the victims seem a little flimsy. Even the title of the show makes it feel like a spectacle, a circus act. It seems to lack nuance and care for the subject matter. As the mother of a victim said in response to Evan Peters' Golden Globe win for his portrayal of Dahmer, "It's a shame that people can take our tragedy and make money. The victims never saw a cent. We go through these emotions every day." This genre, this machine of true crime, uses tragedy and trauma as a way to generate profits. The tone and marketing of this show and other similar media essentially place it on the same level as those weird fucked up tours of serial killer hotspots. I think true crime just confuses me. I used to think the worst elements of the exploitation were mostly confined to the online world of content. There are countless examples of podcasts like Your Favorite Murderer telling stories without the consent of survivors or family of victims, turning real-life tragedy into a quirky Killer of the Week-esque chat show. YouTubers recount stories of sexual assault, torture, and murder like they're doing a makeup vlog. It seems odd to me that someone can feel comfortable profiting off of real life misery. Like, that's their job. That's a weird job. And I thought that this was just due to the lack of guidelines, a lack of understanding and discipline that is hammered into producers and creators within legacy media. But Dahmer and shows of that ilk totally contradict this idea that I had. It's unclear whether one is a symptom of the other, but legacy media and streaming services are just as shameless as their YouTubery cousins. I even feel slightly uncomfortable watching documentaries about these infamous killers, because despite them seeming like they'd be the least sensational and most objective way to indulge with true crime, they're still telling a story and forming a narrative. Creative decisions have to be made as to which victim is more important to focus on for a story beat, and which one needs to be cut or glossed over for pacing. Often just a footnote in the grander story of the killer and the team that helped bring them down. And I don't know, that just always makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not saying Dahmer is a show devoid of virtue, and I'm not saying you're wrong for enjoying it. It's only natural that some people are fascinated by extreme human behaviour, and people who have died in unpleasant and unusual ways. But I also think that we need to be critical of and hold media based on real events with victims or family of victims that are still alive to account. If we can agree that the people who made Everest were dicks for indulging themselves when it came to misrepresenting and twisting the truth in pursuit of generating that cold hard cash, then surely the same applies here. Or not, you know? No one's telling you to stop listening to your podcast, do what you want, I'm not your fucking dad. It's a pretty bleak video to come back with after 6 months, but I think I'm gonna take it chill and hopefully upload once every month or so from here on in. And if you could, kind audience, please give this video a little like and a big old subscribe to the channel. Bye.